The 7 letters to the church that John gives to the churches of Asia Minor follow a particular pattern within those letters. First of all, it begins with a reference to Christ, but not to Christ outright. Rather, it begins with a reference to one of the details of the one like a Son of Man that John saw at the very beginning of his revelation. For example, it says, "The one who stands among the 7 lampstands has this to say. The one who holds the 7 stars in his hand has this to say. The one with the 2-edged sword has this to say," and so on. And then the churches are addressed in which they are given praise and or a reproach for that church. Sometimes only praise is given, sometimes only a reproach, but in many cases both. For example, Smyrna and Philadelphia receive praise. Sardis and Laodicea receive a reproach. The churches that receive both are Ephesus, Pergamum, and Thyatira, receive both praise and a reproach. And each letter ends urging the churches to hear what the Spirit says to them. And each letter concludes with a promise to or about what is referred to as the victor. And it's important to note what the promise is made and how it contrasts to the very beginning of each letter. The beginning of each letter is a reference to Christ that we just heard at the beginning of the book of Revelation. The promises to the victor are a foreshadowing of events that will occur at the end of the book of Revelation, such as references to the tree of life, references to a stone on which is written a new name known only to that person, reference to the reign of God that will be given, or a reference that one will not suffer the second death. The victor will not suffer the second death. So where the address to each church gives a reference to Christ at the beginning, the promises give a foreshadowing of what is to be encountered and visualized and experienced when John enters into the new creation and the new Jerusalem. Now, what are the issues or the problems being faced by the churches? Well, first of all, there are problems that are suffered from outside the community, namely persecutions. Persecutions by the Roman Empire, which would be over matters of religion. The Roman system is on a collision course with Christianity, because Christianity, now no longer exempted from Roman cultic worship, Christians are now expected to worship the pantheon of gods of Rome, and in particular, the emperor as a divine being. And so, in such letters as to Pergamum, we will see references to Satan's throne, a foreshadowing of later persecutions by Rome, but the reference to Satan's throne is a reference to the throne of the Roman emperor, in which Christian people are expected under pain of persecution to offer worship. But also persecutions from the Jewish community. Remember, in 85 AD, the Jewish community expelled the Christians from the synagogues, which left them open to persecution. So you'll see a great deal of hostility toward the Jewish people, but not outright anti-Semitism. Reference to Satan's assembly in the letter to Smyrna gives a reference to self-styled Jews who are not true Jews, but are members of Satan's assembly. Not saying that all Jews are members of Satan's assembly, but rather those who sold out their Christian brethren, leaving them open to persecution by Rome. Expulsion was seen as an act of Satan and an assault on the Christian people. And while this passage in the letter to Smyrna has been mistaken by some groups as a biblical admonition of all Jewish people, one has to keep it in the proper context, that there was a hostility and a resentment for those Jews who sold out their Christian brethren, opening them to persecution at the hands of the Roman Empire. So these were problems being faced from outside the Christian community. There were also internal problems, internal issues being faced, such as influences of idolatry, influences of false teaching. A good example of that is what we read in the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. Paul is dealing with a Greco-Roman society who is still living the hedonistic lifestyle of Greece, even though they had professed to Christianity. And there's where Paul says, the body is not for immorality, the body is for the Lord. We see similar conflicts like that from within the Christian communities that John now addresses in the book of Revelation. And he makes reference to some of these using symbolic language, such as in the letter to Pergamum, he makes a reference to Balaam. Now, if you're familiar with the book of Numbers, in chapters 22 through 24, Balaam was the prophet of a pagan empire that wanted to curse the children of Israel passing through that kingdom on their way to the promised land. Instead of cursing them, he actually bestows a blessing. This is after his donkey has the vision of the angel, and the donkey speaks to him, saying that he sees an angel before him and does not want to pass. But in another place in the book of Numbers, chapter 31, verse 16, Balaam is seen in a negative tradition, as one who leads Israel to paganism, to evil, and to a violation of the covenant they share with God. And so the reference in the book of Revelation to a Balaam is not a reference to a prophet who blesses them, but a false prophet who leads the people to paganism. That's the tradition that is more expressed in the book of Revelation. Also, in two of the letters to Pergamum and Ephesus, we hear a reference to a group called the Nicolaitans. Now, there's a bit, of speculation as to what exactly the Nicolaitans were. But basically, it's to be considered some group from within the Christian community of those churches that are leading the people astray, either by false teachings or by the influx of paganism in the midst of the observance of Christianity. And in those two letters to Pergamum and Ephesus, John urges them to resist the teachings of the Nicolaitans. Also, we have idolatry. In the letter to Thyatira, a person who is referred to as a Jezebel is made reference to. Now again, that harkens back to Old Testament history, in which Jezebel was known from Hebrew history as the Phoenician princess married to King Ahab of the northern kingdom of Israel. She was the great nemesis of the prophet Elijah, because with her came a great deal of paganism, the worship of Baal. When Elijah had his showdown with the 400 prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel, these were prophets under her employ. And so when he defeats them and actually kills them following that showdown on Mount Carmel with the two sacrifices, Jezebel now seeks the life of Elijah. In the context of Revelation, the reference to Jezebel is again a reference to a hostile idolatry that has somehow infiltrated part of the Christian community and seeks to overcome the message of Christianity. And in the letter to the Thyatira church, John asks the people to resist the worship of idols and the praying before idols, as they call themselves Christian, and it is not appropriate for Christians to pray to idols. Finally, in one letter, the last of the 7 letters, the letter to Laodicea, Laodicea is the rejected church who receives the harshest criticism. And what is the reason for that criticism? Simple lukewarmness in proclaiming the faith. He says, "You are neither hot nor cold. How I wish you were one or the other, hot or cold. But because you are neither hot nor cold, but lukewarm, I will spit you or spew you out of my mouth." It's a dulling down in the face of persecution. Christians losing their zeal, either to protect themselves or because they are disheartened by the reality of persecutions. Choices and problems not faced as clearly or as faithfully as they should be faced by Christianity. And we can see lukewarmness as an ongoing problem of Christianity, in which we see Christians who are not as zealous as they could be. So lukewarmness is a very important problem that's being faced by the churches, and is a particular issue faced by Laodicea. So these are the problems and issues being faced by the churches addressed by John. And in reading them, we, even down to today, might ask ourselves the question, what would be the issues addressed to our communities of the church, whether it's a local parish, a diocese, or a church in a particular country? How would John address the church in the United States, or in your particular state or diocese or local parish? What compliment would he give you? What reproach would he give you? And hopefully, we will be promised a particular reward for the victor if we overcome those issues of problem and maintain what makes us strong as a community of faith. And so in these 7 letters to the churches, we can in fact apply them to our own experience of Christianity and how we continue to live in the midst of peacefulness and in the midst of trials and persecution, the zeal we have or in which we lack, as we continue to live as the 7 churches did, as followers of Christ and particular communities of faith.